Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Okay, so today we are so thrilled and excited to welcome back SkyeBlu Cutchie. She is a relationship and intimacy coach, and she's back. She was with us way back, episode 11. What is it that I want for my sexual self? That was so long ago. So this episode 11. We explored how to connect with our own sexual identity, as well as embracing intimacy, and just like trying to be a little more curious about why I feel the way I feel about sex, and not just me, but all of us. So it was an opportunity for us to get a little bit curious. This time, in honor of Men's Health Awareness Month, we're turning our focus to emotional intimacy. And I don't know about anyone else, but I feel this is often an overlooked but incredibly vital aspect of relationship health, especially for men. Many men report feeling disconnected in relationships. And while society often points to simplified explanations, such as women losing sexual interest due to menopause or hormones, I don't know. Why don't we just like take a minute and ask ourselves, how can we really encourage men to explore their own understanding of intimacy and maybe how it impacts them in their lives? And that's what I'm hoping we get to do today. I also want to say, spoiler alert, I understand that we're talking about men's intimacy and there's two women sitting here. While Blue is a relationship and intimacy expert, we both have some professional, some personal experience, but we also understand we're not dudes. And so this conversation is strictly from Blue's research, her expertise, and some of my personal experiences, as well as some of you who send us messages when we bring up sex, which is always interesting. Some hey, talk more about it. Some why do you talk about it? And then some things in between. So I think we're all going to figure out where we lie in this conversation. So just want to go back to for a second. As we know, SkyeBlu reflects, she's been doing a lot of work with men and fostering their emotional intimacy, and not just how it can enhance maybe their relationship satisfaction, but also mental health. There's a lot of stats out there about men and their mental health, in particularly with suicide rates. As we enter the end of the year, going into the new year, these are times that we hear a lot more of these cases rolling out. And so I think this is another great opportunity for us to sort of tune into what's going on for you guys out there, and how you're working through your relationships, your intimacy. And so here we are. We got SkyeBlu here. We're going to welcome her. I'm just going to unmute you. That was a long intro. How are you? Welcome.
Hello. Hi, Kieran. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me back.
Yes.
I'm super excited to be here again.
Good. Me too. I'm waiting for it all day. So many questions for you. Like just, when you sit down and plan and you put these questions together, for me, I think about, okay, what am I curious about? What are some gaps for me? And also, what are the conversations that happen around or don't happen around us? And I think the part about these, this is the second time we're going to do this, you and I, but there's been other episodes where I've asked couples, I've asked people individually, and we always get interesting responses. Myself included, I get awkward sometimes too. And so lately I got to see you not too long ago. You were visiting us here in Canada, and you and my husband actually got talking. And he was very curious about the work you've been doing lately with men and intimacy and relationships and all that stuff. And so he was really encouraging. So a huge shout out to Carrie, because this conversation is dedicated to him, because he was really curious about your role, guys. And, we've had different interactions with guys our age, younger than us and older than us. And there's all these interesting tidbits that lead to sex And ultimately that's what it always comes down to is we're either having sex or we're not having it. But I think there's a lot more in there, right? There's like so much more in there than just this isn't just about getting people to want to have sex. This is about intimacy on different levels, right?
Yes, I would say for most people, not all, we're not going to be black and white, but I think for a lot of people, it's sex is a lot more than just the physical
Yeah.
parts.
Mm.
So I've really honed in on like what I help people with right now, and it's I help people who struggle with intimacy build deeper connections and have a better sex life. And recently, because my audience is like almost 70% men, I've kind of leaned into that to uh, like better understand what's going on for them. What are they struggling with?
Hmm.
What's getting in the way of having a better sex life? What's getting in the way of better friendships, better romantic relationships? And it's been really fascinating and eye opening. And the other thing I've noticed kind of in the field is like there's not a ton of people focusing on that, like
Hmm.
focusing on men's mental health or romantic relationships or sexual health. I'm not saying they don't exist, but
Yeah.
just in my experience, I feel like a lot more people are leaning towards female sexual health.
Yeah, and like the trauma stuff, right? Like we've all really gotten good at understanding, maybe not all of us, but many of us, that there's trauma and it impacts us. And there's all these different ways that our brain responds to trauma. And it's interesting to hear you say, but I'm not surprised to hear you say that, yeah, like there is so little conversation about that. But I'm very surprised to hear that your following is more men. You have a higher percentage of men visiting the work you're doing. So curious if that's A, surprises you, and B, why do you think that is, that there's more men that are following you?
I find it really interesting. Um, I don't find it surprising because in my therapy business, I do get a lot of male clients or male to female trans clients,
Okay, yeah.
which is interesting. I've noticed that trend, but on my social media accounts, it's like really heavily men. Um, and why do I think that's happening? My theory is I think I make men feel safe talking about emotional stuff, talking about like taboo things. Like maybe I make them feel like it's okay to talk about this stuff,
Yeah.
and like I was saying, maybe they don't have anybody in their life that they do talk to about this kind of thing.
Right. It's interesting that I wonder individually if each man shows up and they think, okay, this is just me. But if they look at it from the big picture, there's quite a community of them that are maybe going through some similar things, which is, how do I even start going there and talking about these things? What are the things I'm supposed to talk about? And so, what do you think is like the first thing often that brings them through the door to you?
Well, I mean, it's a mixed bag. I mean, I think of course because I'm a cute woman and I'm talking about sex stuff. I think I do get the men who are kind of creepy
Okay,
and
fair.
and objectifying, and they're
Yes.
like, "Ooh, she must want me because she's talking about sex stuff."
Naturally, yes.
But that's not like the norm. I think that the other people who find me like they struggle with sexual dysfunction or performance anxiety, or they struggle in romantic relationships, or maybe they've never dated and like they just have a lot of anxiety and they want help
Yeah,
and they don't know where to turn, and then they find my account and I make them feel safe.
right. And we're going to get into safety in a little bit too, because I think that word's going to come up a lot today, and it already has, and I think that's a big part of the big picture of this conversation. Any of these conversations that lead us to therapists, is where's the safety and what's my role, what's your role. So I'm gonna pause on that for a second. I wanted to ask you a couple questions. We just got right into it. I on my in my notes I have fun and lighthearted questions first, but we've already jumped into it. But let me back it up because I had some good fun and lighthearted ones. So
Sure.
before we continue the depths of emotional intimacy, let's start with okay, so if you had to plan the perfect date that was all about connection and not romance, not about the sex part, connection part, what would it look like? And is there an unexpected kind of like an activity or setting that you think naturally would bring intimacy out in this way?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think a really great date is doing something fun, new and novel. And that could mean anything, right? Depending on the people. But it could be like doing a cooking class together, going on a hike you've never been on, playing a game
Mm.
together, like a video game or a board game. Um, gosh, like doing art, going shopping at a new mall, or it could be something grand like, we're gonna go to Bali for 2 weeks.
Ooh, I like that one. I'll take that one. What is it about the new and novelty kind of thing that would help us build that connection and not look at it from a romantic way as we said, but more from that connection intimacy place.
Newness and novelty, it brings people together because there's like adrenaline and cortisol and endorphins going on. So there's a physical aspect. Um, and like you're experiencing something you've never experienced before. So you're
Right,
feeling
yeah.
curious, you're feeling open,
Yeah.
and you're doing it together. It's like
Yeah.
it's a bonding moment.
Yeah. I like that as a nice reminder, and I think it's a good point in that new and novelty can be anything and everything that we haven't done, but it's finding something that kind of gets us to look at things in a different way, kind of shake things up. Some of us have been together for a long time. Some of us are already in that new phase, wherever we are in that relationship aspect, trying to find things that excite us is sort of what I'm hearing. And they can be inexpensive too. They don't have to be the trip to Bali.
No, they don't. They don't have to be the trip to Bali. They can be, a new recipe on a Friday night.
Yeah, right. Totally. I'm
Yeah.
eating while Carrie's cooking. What is one thing that you think we don't talk enough about when it comes to emotional intimacy?
That sounds so funny. Any of it? All of it?
All of it in general?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just start right there.
Like how important it is as human beings to experience emotional intimacy and connection. Like, um, maybe that's the piece is like, why is it so important, and why do
Yeah,
we all need it?
yeah. And I think I would even like highlight the question that you just asked, like for you, what's important, like you said, or why do you need it? And the highlighted part is like for you or for us as individuals, because we're all built on what society has taught us about intimacy. And that could be culturally, religion, all the things that you and I had covered in episode 11. There's lots of things that shape and make us and get us to where we are, and particularly about intimacy. And so I think it's always interesting when we don't realize that this is years and years and years in the making of someone telling us to not talk about it, someone hiding something, the TV, social media, all these sorts of things. And so now here we are in a relationship. And, in the beginning, like you said, newness is great. You figure it out what. But many people who enter a relationship, often the goal is longevity, being together forever or whatever that means. And then if that's the case, that passion seems to wither away or die out. We have kids, we have all these things that maybe happen, grief and loss in between. And so what is the thing to do, if we were to work backwards from it to not sort of wither away? Like what is the thing for us to do to keep it healthy and maybe like continuing to be aware of the fact this is part of the relationship too?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, firstly, people have to recognize that if you want a long-term monogamous relationship that thrives, emotional intimacy is the glue. It's going to help you through the hard times. It's going to
Yeah.
keep things fun, interesting. All the oxytocin, that's another hormone chemical that we exude when we have emotional intimacy with a partner. Um, and that it takes work.
Mm,
It is, it's a lifetime project, really, but in a good way, right?
yeah.
It's like an arts and crafts that you're gonna have to keep up. If you let it sit in the corner for 20 years, it's gonna
Yeah.
get stale and dusty.
Totally, right? And I don't like stale and dusty, so keep
Who
my
likes stale
baseboard.
and
Yeah, right. He likes dust bunnies around there, not me.
dusty? Yeah.
Every change room I go to in the mall, I'm like, why? What's with the dust bunnies in the corners here?
Hmm.
But you're right. Like that's not literally, but literally what I hear what you're saying is like a it's work, but also at the same time like you get what you put in. And so if we don't water our grass, the grass is greener where you water. If we don't do that, then years later, months later, or however long later, weeks later, we find ourselves wondering, where did it go wrong, or how did it get to this place, or you never look at me that way, that kind of mentality. But it takes two or however many is in a relationship. I don't know. Like that's the other thing is we are talking about a monogamous relationship most of the time today, I think. um, and I'm trying to be mindful of that because I understand that is one way of living your life through monogamy and you have your partner and you're together forever or whatever that is. But there are many other different forms of relationships out there, and I think even today, like intimacy can also mean for you as an individual, not just this is about men and women. I think sometimes we get caught up in traditional roles, and that's not really that's not necessarily where we're at. This conversation's for anyone and everyone that is wondering about where they at with their own intimacy, as well as if we want to build on that or grow from there. And particularly for the guys, because you guys are on the spot today. This is for you guys. So okay, so I have a couple more questions for you here, but maybe before I do that, let's pause. Why don't we do our middle fingers up, and then I'll go into some of these other ones. Yeah, yeah. She laughs. Oh, what do we have today, Blue?
Oh man, I, it's a hot topic. I'm down here in the USA, in Washington State, and we just had our presidential election, and
We
Trump
did.
won. And I had like a mini depressive episode the last few days. So fingers up to the American political system and whatever is going on in this country. It's really intense and sad and disheartening.
Yeah, I feel for you. I think wherever people are at, whether they voted for him or not, obviously the ones that didn't probably feel it the
Mm-hmm.
most. Sorry, not probably. They do feel it the most. I just think for North America, like the US, you guys, are our big sister, and we trust you guys and we look to you guys a lot, and we get a lot of our safety through you guys. These last few years on our end,
Yeah.
watching our big sister over here fall apart in all sorts of different ways has been difficult because you feel it if anyone has a sibling out there, and if you have a sibling that's going through a hardship, you're naturally going to feel it. And I think there's so much confusion going on out there. So like how are you guys coping with the heels of this election right now, with the state of your country? Like are people, is the media being truthful about people losing their minds out there and people being fearful, people looking to move outside of the US? Like what kind of conversations are going on?
Yeah, I think it's pretty split. Like, of course, not 100, not 50-50, but like pretty evenly split. People either for or against the new administration. And I think the people who were for are elated. Like,
Yeah, of course.
America
Yeah,
is saved. That
yeah,
type of sentiment. And then there's people who wanted Kamala Harris, and
yeah,
I think I'm in that camp, and it feels devastating. It feels really terrifying. And we can get into it. I think there's gender stuff
Mm-hmm.
going
Mm-hmm.
on. I can talk about, men's mental health and emotional intimacy. I think it's totally related.
How so?
So this is just my opinion
Yeah, of
and,
course. Yeah,
based on my experience, but I really believe that toxic masculinity is alive and well in the US right now. And I think that people like Trump being in positions of power encourage the toxic masculine behavior and rhetoric, the dialogue, the way people talk. He's given it the okay stamp, you know? It's okay
yeah.
to talk about women like they're trash, or it's okay to do whatever you want, or, um, control people's bodies as a
Mm-hmm.
man. And I think all of that is like really coming to the surface. Plus internal masculinity or internal misogyny, like the women who
Yeah.
are in support of Trump, like I truly believe they've been indoctrinated
Mm-hmm.
with misogyny.
I hear you, man. I wonder too, like when I hear the BIPOC community
Yeah.
and women, like when you hear that that's, they voted, Trump and all that. And honestly, I don't even know if it is Trump. Like he is who he is, and he's a perfect example of a distraction. It's like being
Mhm.
let down by humans that truly feel this one thing. And, again, I'm not right, I'm not wrong, but I just think it's sad, like you said, that yeah, we are trying to move forward, or we were making, leaps and bounds with mental health, with toxicity, in particularly really seeing it in, national sports. Everyone's got their opinions about sports, but sports is where you saw lots of stuff coming out, the sexual assaults, trans related, and that sort of helps bring things to the surface. And yeah, I think it's going to be a rough one for sure, because when you have a leader that supports what they do and walks around that way. I mean, yeah, it'd be no different if I'm walking around doing my thing all day. My kids are going to be heavily influenced by me. It doesn't matter if I'm a good person or not. And yeah,
Mhm.
when you hear about women that feel this is the best thing in the world, you just like feel so slapped by them. When you hear BIPOC community, and I know people trying to survive, but when you only think about the economy, and that's your fucking excuse all the time, oh, for the economy's sake. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, economy's important, but only the people that are going to feel the economy are the same people that are going to feel the economy do well. The rest, it's going to suck all the time. Anyway, so it's hard when your own people, believe what they believe, and you can't argue it, you can't do that, but you're like, big picture wise, big picture wise, how are we going to deal
Mhm.
with these big systemic societal issues?
Absolutely. And when you have a man, he's a symbol, right? He's the he's the symbol now for what millions of people believe is a powerful, stable, emotionally mature human male.
Okay.
And I think that's problematic.
Definitely want to encourage us to keep talking, being upfront, being open, being okay to say this sucks, because if at least we can hear more people talking like that, and then we feel like, oh, okay, let's get together, we can do something about this. But when no one says anything, then it's like, oh, we all agree then that this is what we want for the world. Okay.
Yeah, and having conversations like we're having now about men's health,
Hmm.
emotional intimacy, and connection, rather than letting it sit and fester and
Yeah.
not talk about the challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like historical patterns continue to repeat themselves, and they also will continue to show up in our day-to-day living interactions. How the world has been and how history has been taught to us shows up every day in how we interact with each other. And I think that it's good for us to build some awareness around how do my political beliefs, my religious beliefs, my medical beliefs, my gender beliefs, my racial beliefs, all my beliefs, like, is it time to renovate and upgrade them? because we all got by with these kinds of beliefs for so many years, but if we're still living in the madman era, which many maybe are, then it's time to time to upgrade, people, because I can't raise two boys in my house who think consent doesn't matter and women's bodies don't matter and only men are comedians.
Good for
So
you.
let's change that up, right? Okay, so it's so funny that my next question for you actually was going to be, and I didn't know what your middle finger is up with, so it's interesting because I was like, oh, I wanted to know, like, going back to sort of the intimacy part, we had paused, done our middle fingers, and come back. And so I wanted to know, like, why do you think people are still so uncomfortable with talking about sex, intimacy openly? Like, what is the thing that maybe you're seeing with clients, or you're learning, reading about, or your own, input about? What is the main thing that seems to get in the way for many of us to be okay to share and talk about these sexual
Yeah,
things
I'm
and
just
stuff?
writing this stuff down because I think this is a multi-layered answer.
I love
Um,
it.
well, I think that our background has a huge part to play in the way that we show up in conversations around relationships, sex, intimacy, emotional intimacy, like our religion, our cultural backgrounds, race, um, all the things you mentioned before, gender, age, etc., etc. Like all of that really influences how we feel showing up in those conversations. Like, was I raised in a home that might have been religious or influenced by a culture that is sexually repressed?
Right.
And I say that in a very gentle way. Like, sexual repression is very real, and sexual repression generally results in sexual shame. You
Hmm.
know, like these urges, these desires, these fantasies, these thoughts that I have, there's something wrong with me.
Right.
That's where shame comes from.
So many people, I would imagine, would follow down that path of, the underlying shame, because religion, upbringing, gender, all these sorts of things, like we just said, play a huge part and shape our view of sex. However, sometimes, and I think I said this a little while ago, like, we grow up and we do the things we do, we don't realize that these things were, all these subliminal messages in some ways that were there impacting us all along. So
Mm.
what is a thing that you would suggest that we could do to make this conversation less comfortable? So when I think about my own worldview, my own context of how I was brought up, what is there one thing or something I could focus in on that would help me make my relationship and talking about sex, make it less awkward, like make it more comfortable to talk about? Like,
Yeah. Um, well, unfortunately, we can't take the feelings away, right? They're just, we're going to have them. So I think instead of trying to make things less uncomfortable, if you're in a place of shame or repression, or like this is just not something I talk about, it's gonna feel uncomfortable.
yeah.
If you want to start talking about it, if you want to start working on your relationship with sex and intimacy, however, you can help yourself start to normalize it. And I think that's helpful, and you do that by um, finding safe ways to explore that part of yourself, either through listening to podcasts like this,
Mm.
or watching um, educational content on social media, getting some great books, um, talking to friends if you have safe friends or family members,
Hmm.
talking to them about it, and doing these things in baby steps and in ways that make that you're not feeling unsafe.
Yeah.
And you just start to normalize it for yourself over time, or getting professional help, get a sex therapist or a sex coach.
Can I ask, like, what would be the benefit in me wanting to get more comfortable in wanting to go there? Like, what would I gain from opening that door and exploring that?
That's a great question. As human beings, we naturally avoid things that give us anxiety,
Fuck yeah.
right? Because temporarily, if I avoid that thing, if I avoid talking about sex, I get to escape the anxiety for a moment.
Right.
So I totally understand why people don't want to go there. However, the thing doesn't disappear.
Yeah.
If you feel anxious about sex or however you feel about it, that is not going to disappear. It's within you. And we are all sexual beings. Everybody's sexual identity looks completely unique, and that's the beauty of it. But we all have a part of it within us. That's my point.
Yeah.
It's not going to go away. So if you can choose to try to ignore it for the rest of your life, but in my experience, that causes a lot of distress.
Yeah. How so?
Well, I'll just give you some examples, but like
Mm-hmm.
I said, this looks different for everybody. Um, people who they feel sexual shame and maybe they still self-pleasure. They still
Mm-hmm.
masturbate, but then they feel awful about it.
Yeah.
What is wrong with me? Why can't I just stop? So you can continue to do that for the rest of your life, but boy, it does not feel good and it creates all sorts of distress on the inside if you don't try to like work through it. Like understand like where is this coming from? What about my background has kind of lent to this belief about my sexual pleasure? What do I want to believe? We
Mm.
need to ask ourselves that as adults. What do I want to believe right now? Because all of my beliefs thus far are probably due to my upbringing and my background. What would I rather believe?
Mm.
How would I rather feel? And we can get to that place, but we have to allow ourselves to work through it and process it and
Right.
normalize it.
You said something a little while ago, which was like, you can't escape it. It's within us.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes for some people, it's like this, it's that door's closed. I don't have sex. Like, so I can just shut this podcast off now because it's not part of my day to day. So would your response be connected to those people too? Would you still say that? Well, it's still within us. So maybe it's the physical act in itself that, okay, fine, I'm not doing, but there's still some other desires because I genuinely think there are people out there that are like, that's not my world, right? And I'm not saying that's wrong. I just feel that they're being misled. Like that if we truly feel I've closed the door to sex and I don't need it ever and whatever, and that's fine. I don't need to ever have sex. Okay, I'm not arguing that with you, but there's things, there's pleasures, there's moments, there's fantasy, there's desires that need to be seen. Does this conversation impact all of us, whether we are physically having sex or not?
Yes.
Okay, so how is it possible that this conversation would impact me if I was not having sex or having any kind of conversations about sex? Like how would this still, and I wasn't masturbating either. So how would this impact me, or why would I benefit from knowing all this?
Great question. So, like I said, we're all sexual beings, but what that means and what that looks like is completely unique to every person.
Hmm.
So, let's pretend I identify as asexual and I'm choosing not to have physical sexual interactions with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't enjoy self pleasuring. That's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally fine. That's part of your part of your sexual identity. That's what you're choosing. If you've done a lot of processing and getting to a place of understanding and acceptance,
Hmm.
then that was your journey. And this is your choice. Similarly, let's pretend, I don't know, let's talk about a man.
Yeah.
Let's pretend a man in a marriage has decided, he doesn't want to have sex anymore. He enjoyed it while it lasted. He's decided he doesn't need it anymore in his life.
Hmm.
And he's expressed that to his wife. He's not feeling any particular feelings of shame. This is just his choice.
Right. Yeah.
This is
Okay.
happening in life. Then that was his process, and this is now what he's choosing. I think that's very different than sex is hard, sex gives me anxiety, sex is difficult in my relationship, so we're just not gonna do it. We're just not gonna talk about it, and I'm just gonna pretend that I'm okay.
Yeah. You explained that so well. Thank you for figuring out what I was trying to ask, because even I couldn't get, but that's
Mm,
exactly it. There's a difference between self-awareness, a process, coming to a conclusion, in a rational way, and you're aware of it, and that's your life, and you move on. But you're right, the latter is what I think many of us are aware of, which is the shame, the high, don't talk about it, you know, if it happens, whatever you need to do to be angry at yourself or whatnot people do or whatnot, just that it's not a good thing. And so it is helpful to hear that there is support out there like yourself to help people get to whatever place they're trying to get to, whether it's I just want to be in a relationship with and understand how to help my partner know that sex isn't for me, as well as understanding, what that means and where that comes from, to have someone sort of walk you through that, because it's the core, like you said, intimacy is at the core of relationships. So sexual intimacy is one way of being intimate. There are many other ways, I would imagine, as well. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of different levels of intimacy. Um, this is something I've been kind of focusing on in my work recently, is that I'm going to talk about men and women while recognizing there are many other genders, but I'm just focusing on those two at the moment. Um, Many women, not all, but many, they want and need a deeper level of emotional security and connection to feel open and willing for sexual intimacy, even physical intimacy like touch.
Hmm.
And I think it's complicated as to why this is so, and we can come back to that. But I think that a lot of men, heterosexual men, struggle to understand that. They don't, and I think it's because for boys and men, at least in North America, we have told them that their feelings are bad. Don't connect to other people emotionally because then you're a
Hmm.
pussy.
Hmm. Definitely. Yep. Be a man.
Be a man, suck it up.
Hmm.
No one wants to hear about your feelings. And unfortunately, there's a lot of women who participate in this rhetoric, and it's messed up, right? We do so much damage to men in this way.
Yeah.
We teach men and boys that the way that they get connection and care and love is by fucking,
Mm-hmm.
quite frankly. And again, I know this is not black and white, but I'm just talking about generalizations.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
It's We're not here to blame. A lot of men hear me talk about this stuff and they get really pissed. And they're like, don't tell me to change. It's her fault. She's supposed to give me what I want. Like, I get a
Hmm.
lot of negative feedback here. This is not about blaming men. This is about recognizing that the system that boys and men are raised in oppresses their feelings,
Hmm.
and it discriminates against their emotional ability to connect with other humans.
Hmm.
And I think that that is an injustice.
Yeah, like, yeah, applause to what you just said. Like, I think men from every culture could connect to this one thing about in every culture's way, we need strength from men in a different way, and it often comes out from the physical way, which is also interesting because sex can be looked at strength in that way too. And so it's like a confusing place to be. And I think for us women, like this is where, this is where my passion lies in helping my kids and men, is because it's also going to benefit me too. You think of us women growing up, and I'll give you an example. Like, I'm rewatching Mad Men right now.
Mm,
I don't know if you've ever watched it.
I'm aware.
I just have to like focus when I watch it because I don't think I watched it in the same way when it came out however many years ago. I cared more
Mhm.
about the glam of it. When I'm watching it now, I can't help but really listen to how they're talking, how the women talk, how the men talk. And it's such a good time capsule and such a well-written show to help us understand, like, this is about the best time to see where we got a lot of that toxicity from. Of course, it started before that, right? These women want to be seen and heard. And there is a moment where it just stops because they're mothers and wives now. And so you become these housewives and these women, and the men get to go have their affairs all day long and go have sex with women, and in this like fantasizing kind of way. And then you have your boring vanilla sex with your wife when you come home. And so, anyways, why am I bringing all this up? I'm just bringing all this up because it's a point, an example to what you're saying around the toxicity and how men have been raised and continue to be raised, continue to live in, is going to significantly impact a lot of these relationships, particularly if we're talking about a hetero relationship, because how these guys are raised is going to impact us women. And let's do the push pull. The guy wants to have sex with his wife, and she may or may not want to, but likely she's not, because there hasn't been connection leading up to this sexual moment. It's kids stuff, family stuff, work stuff, stress stuff, life stuff. And now it's bedtime. And now it's supposed to be just like lay down and let's have sex. And it's so interesting because it's exactly what you said. And Carrie and I have talked about this with older friends who are not with a lot of their partners. And this is what happened. Many of their dialogue was, well, she doesn't care anymore. She's cold is a big one I heard. Oh, it's her hormones apparently. And
Yeah.
and then so he and I have been working backwards and having those conversations, like, sure, hormones is one part of it. Like, I'm in 43, like, we're gonna go through it, but that's not it. Like, you can have a great sexual life while going through menopause. You can do that. It's just we don't have partners always that get that and know how to do that. So
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you a question about emotional intimacy because that's what we're talking about. What exactly is emotional intimacy? What is it that's gotten in the way, and how these guys were raised, how societies continue to bring them up, that there's a disconnect between them and emotional intimacy. So, like, if one were to wonder right now, how would you help them understand what is that?
I will try my best to describe. So, emotional intimacy is having the ability to know your own feelings, to be able to name your own feelings, then be able to express your own feelings
Mm.
in a way that is like delivered in a kindness and a respect.
Hmm.
Does that so that's the first part.
Mm-hmm.
The second part would be being able to hold space for someone else's emotions, listen, hear, validate them, and not fly off the handle when you hear something difficult.
Right.
In my opinion, that's kind of the core of emotional intimacy. And this works both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about partners. It's an emotional maturity, if you will, and being able to share that with your partner, being able to, and it's about vulnerability. That's a big part of it. This willingness to open up, invite your partner in to see you, to hear you, to hold you, and vice versa, to see them, to hold them, to hear them. And this connection, you can like, I imagine like this energetic bridge between two
Right.
people when we're practicing that together. That is the emotional intimacy.
Hmm. That's very well said. And I think I would just invite everyone to maybe think about like how would you describe that in your own lives, as well as is it is it something that we're all actively working on, to cultivate in our relationships? And so I think it's a good understanding and just a reflection on where does emotional intimacy lay in our own relationships? What's my role with it? Um, because I think you're talking about, emotional maturity, emotional intelligence. You're talking about the ability to be able to sit with your feelings. That could be the opposite about this, sex, let's say, and sitting with my own and, trying to figure out in a healthy, safe way together, like where do we meet each other? As you said, building this bridge, with potential intimacy gaps. And I think this happens a lot in relationships is there's a lot of gaps that we start with and red flags, and we overlook them because she's so hot, he's so this, blah, 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 blah. But then as time goes by, it's hard to go back and fill those gaps because they get bigger and bigger. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to pause and ask ourselves, and okay, like where do I fit in this? Is there something that you would suggest to men who are listening right now, or even men and their partners, when it comes to their level of emotional intimacy? Like, is there something that they can particularly focus on to start a conversation, whether it's with themselves or with their partner?
Yes, and I might invite people to think about like why, like why do I want to do that? Because if you're going into a conversation because they never listen to you and they need to hear what you're saying and they're the bad guy,
Yeah.
like that's not a good motivation to try to have this emotionally connective conversation.
Right.
Um, so I would recommend like coming into this conversation with a desire to be heard and a desire to be curious, because like being curious about your partner, that's what opens up the doors in the
Right.
first place.
Right. Okay.
Um, and then for something to actually say, if we're talking about just emotional intimacy, I'm going to make something up, but like, let's pretend that I feel unheard. I feel unimportant right now. I'm at home with the kids all the time. I'm cooking and cleaning, and you come home and you just grab my butt and you just want to have sex, and I'm like, ugh. How do you
Hmm.
start that conversation?
Right. Right. Well,
I would.
some of us probably know how those kind of conversations go, right?
It
Like,
can go
ooh.
very badly.
Hmm.
I've seen
Hmm.
it. So I recommend soft landings, and that is to say you start with something like, honey, I love you. I have something really important I want to talk to you about. It might be hard for you to hear.
Right.
Are you in a place to like sit and like listen to me right now? Because this is really important to me. So you're
Yeah.
checking in. Do they have the capacity? Hopefully,
It's a
hopefully the
delicate topic. So it is important that we're being aware when we're entering a conversation like this. I agree with you.
okay.
So, can you tell us how emotional intimacy can really impact your relationship satisfaction and maybe even your mental health?
I think, I see this all the time in my coaching program. Like people come in, couples, and they say, we want to have more sex,
That's
usually.
right. Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, great. Let's peel back the layers. What's going on here? And I dig in with each person, and there's so much going on. And I would say 9.5 times out of 10, there's a severe lack of emotional intimacy. They're not talking, they're not sharing feelings, they're not connecting. They're great as a team, taking the kids to and from things, keeping the house going, paying bills, or going to work. But there's no talking, there's no sharing, there's no vulnerability. And so, of course, there's no sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you go from 0 to 100? For most people, that doesn't work very well. That was just an example to say emotional intimacy is like the oil in the engine. That's what my metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
If your oil is old, slow, dirty, your engine is not going to do well. It's going to creak and smoke and maybe fire and blow up, right?
Yeah.
I really believe that we have to keep that oil clean and flowing and topped up.
Yeah, topped up for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, in order to keep the oil clean and flowing, like prior to that, you had mentioned some signs that, where couples are lacking with emotional intimacy. We're not talking, we're good with the kids and all that, but not vulnerable with each other. Is there like what is one or two things, particularly men and maybe and their partner, what are some things that can be done here to pay attention to signs? Or when you notice a sign, how, if someone's listening right now being like, oh my gosh, maybe this is us, like we got to do something here, where would be the best place to start?
You mean if they're trying to figure out if this is an issue in their relationship?
Yeah, like to start
Yeah.
talking about emotional intimacy and what that means to us, what that means for us. And again, I'm not just saying let's sit down and talk about emotional intimacy, but like, how do I start to talk to my partner and tell them that I'm feeling the things I may be feeling inside that's going to lead to these conversations about our sex life or our intimacy, or caressing and all that in between stuff.
For sure. Well, I just want to recognize that this can be really challenging and scary because to to open up and share anything, a feeling, a word, a desire, takes a lot of vulnerability. So finding a place of courage within yourself and telling yourself, hey, I deserve to be heard. I deserve to be held in this relationship, if that's what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And reminding yourself that your partner deserves that too. So it's not
Right.
a one-way street. So finding the courage and then again doing that soft landing, like, hey, you can be honest. Like, I feel scared to talk about this because we don't talk about feelings very often. But I'm just like really needing this right now. Can
Mm-hmm.
can we do this? Or do you feel up to hearing me? I think I would really recommend that instead of just launching into the topic, because that can, the person's not prepared.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a loaded topic. Like it's such a big thing to talk about, but the baby steps, I appreciate that. It's like, okay, even I feel weird, I feel afraid, I feel uncomfortable to even bring this up. I think that right there is the key to, maybe unlocking the door to this relationship improvement or acknowledgement, whatever it is, because maybe some people it's not improving, but it's recognizing like we're all humans, as you said in the beginning, and we all need connection. And it's figuring out how that can work in our relationship. And sometimes we talked about this earlier, like long-term relationships. And you mentioned desire and feelings. Sometimes these desires and feelings can fade over time. Maybe we've never brought it up and they're gone, or we are not bringing it up in the best way and we just feel rejected. And so what's your thought with, these long-term relationships? If your desires and these things fade, like can they be reignited? Have you seen that working with couples?
I mean, the short answer is yes, it can be reignited for sure. It's a process, it takes effort and patience and time. But if that's what you both want, absolutely possible. I think if only one person wants that,
Yeah.
it's not going to work very well, right? It's if
Really
one person
difficult.
is just like, nope, fuck it, I don't want that anymore. Um, what are you going to do? Like,
So what do you do? Because there's got to be couples out there where they love each other so much, but then something like this maybe like kind of divides them. And have you seen that before?
absolutely. Yeah. And it's having these conversations requires a massive level of emotional maturity. And I help folks do that, find themselves in that place and gain the
Right.
skills to have these hard conversations. But if people want very different things, like one person is like, I don't want to have sex anymore. That's not for me. And the other person is like, but this is so important to me.
Yeah.
That's very hard, but it's incredibly common.
Hmm.
And there's through the tough conversations, people figure out what they're going to do about it, right?
Right.
Are they just going to be continue the way that they are? The one partner is celibate, the other one self pleasures, maybe. Or does this mean we can't be together anymore because this
Hmm.
person needs a sexual relationship? Or does it mean we open up the relationship and try non monogamy?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, there are options out
Right.
there. It's just these can be very hard conversations to have.
For sure. And you've mentioned communication a few times, and I
Mhm,
think, I'm hearing that's a key part in all of this. And
mhm,
so do you have some tips and tricks and some ways that we can look at, we all communicate differently. Is that something we need to look at when we're going to enter a conversation like this? What are some tips and tricks you can give us about
mhm.
paying attention to how we
Sure.
communicate? Yeah.
So I'll give you the tiny bite-sized version.
Yeah.
But to be a good sharer, we need to do a few things. We need to focus on the self, focus on me. Use a lot of I statements. I feel, I want, I think, this is my experience, versus you always do this and it makes me feel blah. That's very blamey and shamey, and that's not going to help.
Right. Can
Also,
I
as a
ask you
sharer,
something before you move forward?
yeah.
So let's talk about guys who are bred and as we shared, toxic masculinity, don't talk about your feelings. So communication may not be a strength for some of these men possibly. So
Yeah.
how if we were to think about one of those guys that maybe you've worked with or that we know who just words are not their thing, is there a way to help them start to acknowledge that to start kind of start to even get to that place?
hmm I actually work with a lot of these men.
Yeah, is
Who,
that like a common
yes.
presenting concern? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're one of my favorite types of clients to work
Really? Okay, how come?
with. Well, usually if a man is coming to me and he's saying, I don't know how to talk about my feelings, I really struggle with communication and connection, he's already at a place where he wants to grow.
Mhm.
He's admitting he's struggling and he's saying, I need help.
Yeah.
And that is like such a beautiful thing. I
Mm.
like I get all like wistful thinking about it. They're
It
just
is
like,
huge. Like that's going
it's
against the
huge.
odds of how you're brought up in this world, and you've decided to go, already against that to show up in your, a therapist's office to say, "Help
Yeah.
me."
And they're so brave to bring that up, to admit they're struggling, to ask for help.
Right.
Like, that's super admirable. And they're also just prime for growth and change. So typically, if a guy comes to me and he's in that spot, I start to give him the tools, I start to offer some validation. Usually, the first place we start is like identifying your own feelings. What am I feeling right now? Like, because they haven't been taught the language, they haven't been encouraged to look inside. and sit with the feelings, let alone name them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you want to start. Sit
Right.
within, what's my body feeling right now? Okay, I'm really tight in my chest. Like, what does that mean? Do I feel anxious? Am I angry? Am I heartbroken? I don't know. Like, so there's really cool charts online you can find. I can actually provide you one. I don't know if that would help.
Yeah, that's
But
awesome.
like, they're called feeling charts,
Mm-hmm.
feeling wheels,
Mm-hmm.
and it just like lists a ton of feeling words because it's a language that we
For
gotta
sure.
learn, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, if you even think about anyone seen Inside Out, if you
Yeah.
have it, it's a great place to start in how we start to build this insight and our feelings and our
Mm,
thoughts, right? And we all start with nothing.
I love that
And
movie.
I agree. I agree. The second one's it's just as well, like done so well for sure.
So
There's
good,
we met Ennui a couple of times in my household now, so I'm like, oh, Ennui has arrived. If that's her name, I can't
yeah.
remember, but I think that's her
I
name.
love it.
Yeah, she's here now. Oh, great.
Um,
Okay, so a lot of what we're talking about is like safety is the new sexy in some ways. Maybe it's not the new, it's the old, but it's the new old. We're bringing it back in style, maybe. Like you talked about safety, and so what is one way some of the men that come to you understand what it means to be in a safe space and be part of providing a safe space?
this is an interesting question. Multi-layered. I'll try to keep it brief. I think that for a lot of men, just because they're men, they're gendered as a man or their sex as man, they've grown up feeling bodily safe in the world. They don't often have to think about feeling unsafe, like someone's gonna hurt me.
Yeah.
That's not always the case. Lots of men grow up in abusive homes. But I'm talking about like walking around in life, right? Looking around every corner. A lot of women feel very unsafe in our bodies because we get told we're going to be raped or assaulted or harassed or yelled at or intimidated
Or
or
abortions don't matter. We can't be part of
abortions
those
don't matter.
decisions, right? Our bodies are not ours.
Totally. So, in general, men don't have to think about those things very much,
So interesting.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so that's just their lived experience. And when it comes to sexual pleasure, oftentimes men receive messages like yeah, get as many women on your belt as you can, right? Like you're
Right.
not a
Yeah.
man until you fuck.
That's
Like
true.
I've heard that a lot. Um, like
That should be the name of this episode. You're not a man. What is it? Unless you fuck or until you
until you
fuck.
fuck.
Yeah. The complete opposite of what we're trying to say, but hey, that
Yeah,
might bring a lot of men to this because they're listening for the secret of how to get all the sex in the world. But we're telling them exactly how to get all the sex in the world, right?
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with fucking, just to be
No.
clear.
Yeah.
But back to the safety piece. Um, men's sexual pleasure is celebrated. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like, haha, like like the nut shot and porn is all celebrating male pleasure, right?
Yeah.
For women, on the other hand, there's a lot of sexual shame, slut shaming,
Mm.
and all in a lot of religions, like female pleasure is demonized.
Yeah.
We police each other, like,
Mm.
oh, she's so slutty. Look at her, she's
Mm.
showing her cleavage, right?
Right.
So,
I wish one day I'd be called that.
so women often are just brought up in a system that tells them their body and their pleasure is bad
Yeah.
and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So, two very different backgrounds, two very different systems and beliefs, and you put them together and you say, have sex,
Go have it. Yeah, go do it
right?
now. On their
So,
wedding nights, yes.
it's it's difficult for women to feel safety and security while they feel pretty fucking safe, usually.
Mm-hmm.
But there are ways to help women feel more secure and safe in a relationship, including emotional intimacy,
Mm.
that and they kind of like open up to the possibility and the willingness for more sex. Did
Right.
that answer your question?
Yeah, like you said, there's a lot to it, right? And so
Yeah.
it does answer it because I think when you put those two together and now we're trying to build safety in there has to be acknowledgement of, again, like working backwards from where did I come from? What's my understanding of all of this information, and what is your understanding? And then how do we make sense of what's gonna happen for both of us in this relationship? And I think we miss that because we only know what we know, and when we're taught an individualistic way, my way is the right way. And so sometimes I think we get lost in translation in these couple relationships because do these things to meet me where I'm at. And I'm miles ahead of you over here saying, let's have all the sex in the world. And you're so far behind me. And I'm just like, catch up, let's go do it. And I think we have to just slow down and like you're saying this, like be realistic about where we're truly at and do some of that internal stuff, asking ourselves these questions, like, what do I need right now? What am I feeling about this? And then that vulnerability brings out that honesty piece about, okay, like this is hard to have this conversation, but I'm wondering about it, and maybe you are, and see where that goes, and all the other conversations that can come out of that. Is there something in particular that you focus on about safety with men when the physical, when, from the body perspective, that they're the safest people in the world, but from the internal piece, when that's not something many of them have been taught, how do they make sense of some of these conversations around finding safety internally and from an emotional place?
I think for a lot of men, not all, but for a lot of men, it can be difficult because they might take it personally. They're saying, well, I'm
Interesting,
not
yeah.
that. I'm not, I would never do that. I'm a safe person. And it's like, you probably are, and your partner probably knows that logically, but because of her lived experiences, her body and sex and pleasure, they don't feel very safe.
Yes.
So trying to tell men, like, okay, if you're feeling defensive, just remind yourself, like, unless you're an abusive partner, this is not actually about you
Mm-hmm.
personally. You're not an unsafe person. This is an opportunity for you to build this beautiful, secure, loving, caring, validating, emotionally connected environment where your partner gets to feel more safe. And that's a gift that
Mm-hmm.
you can give to her and to your kids and yourself,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then in the end, like, you're going to feel more connected and fulfilled.
Right.
And there's a higher chance where you're going to have more physical intimacy and sex too.
Definitely. I'm really glad to hear that these conversations are happening with the men, in with your clients and you, as well as today with us, because I think a couple of things that stood out for me was just forgetting for a second about um, most men's physical safety sort of radius, and women knowing this. I know this part. I don't run early morning, late at night for a reason. There's all these
Mm-hmm.
things. And then I think as we just talked about the election and all these sorts of things that are happening, this is going to impact a lot of boys growing up, and men continuing with the message that they've been brought up with, men rule. And so I think that this is a really good opportunity for people that are listening to explore that safety part around, okay, like what does it take to help my partner feel safe? And what is that for them? And it's not just protecting them physically from bad guys coming into the house. It's also protecting them, emotionally, or working with them emotionally, uh, bad thoughts coming into their, head maybe or whatnot about sex or whatnot. I just think there's like ways to help us realize that we have to open our mouth and have these conversations with each other. And they might suck in the beginning. We're figuring out, where do I start, all these parts to these baby steps. But if we don't go there, I think from a bigger picture, whether we're having sex or not, we're just really missing on opportunity for men to evolve in ways that some of us have seen with our dads and with our brothers and our partners, but not all of us get to see that. And not all men get to feel that worthiness of, oh, I can open up safety in other ways. And that can mean emotionally. I can actually sit down with a group of buddies today and not just make a joke about, trying to kill myself. I can actually tell them that I legit want to do this, or I'm having a hard day. And I think sometimes, I know we're talking about emotional intimacy with sex, but like that plays a huge part for guys, for, friendships and safe spaces for them to talk about the things that they're supposed to do. Because I don't know how many guys talk about these sorts of things, with their buddies. I know from my experience, they're all distractive kind of conversations about all big things like AI or my car or whatever vacation. Yeah, surface stuff. That's great. Okay, but how am I really doing? And buddy, how are you really doing? So anything that comes up that's worked or that your clients have said that really help them open the door to having that kind of a conversation with themselves. Sorry, with themselves. That's, as a dude.
I mean, from what I've experienced, like, men need to be super honest about like, look inside yourself. Is this something you struggle with? Does it bother you? Does it cause you distress?
Yeah.
Because you're lonely, because you're isolated, because you're not connected with anyone. All you do is work and provide, and you're tired, and you're alone. Like, that's a pretty common experience I hear within or without relationships. If that is true for you, do you want to stay in that place? Be honest. Maybe you do. Maybe you're like, this is who I am. Or maybe the risk isn't worth it. I don't know. But if there's any part of you, even small, that's like, you know what? I would like to feel different. I'd like to have a different connection. I'd like to feel safe opening up. Like, that's wonderful. Like, hold that little part of yourself and give it encouragement. Normalize it and find your healthy support, right? Like I said earlier, is that seeing a professional. Sometimes that feels easier at first because it's a professional relationship and there's safe boundaries.
Yeah.
So you can start there, or start with books, or start with online communities that are healthy ones. Healthy online communities.
How do you know which ones are?
That's a good point. Question. Really great question. Stay away from red pill.
Yeah.
Stay away from incel. But real communities that want to support men and their mental health and their emotional connections.
Right.
You start there, or if you have safe people in your life.
Yeah. And maybe even like, let's help you find some, like, if your answer is I don't have safe people in my life, like let's like lean into that, because we all need one, if not more, of a safe person in our lives that we can, have as a sounding block or whatnot. So I just would really recommend, if you're like, I don't have anyone, then can we look into that? Why is that? What's that about? What would it look like if you did have one? Would you know if you had a safe person in your life? Because, as you talked about, and you talk about this on your site too, like there are so many stats out there that men are lonelier now than they have been in years. And it makes sense. We're trying to re-script the man's role on so many levels, as women have built their voices and are continuing to. We're not living in, that old way. Not all of us. I'm saying. I know some still are. But I think, we're looking at this loneliness that's not just impacting men and their mood, it's impacting them on many different levels. And I'm just curious if you could share, like, how do you think that loneliness affects men's ability to foster emotional intimacy in their relationships?
I have seen, well, I mean, even in my personal life, I'll share a little bit about that. Like, most men in my personal life and my family are this very like traditional idea of men. They're they're very closed off. They get very uncomfortable when you talk about any sort of feeling or experience, let alone sex. Um, and growing up with a father who was like that was really hard. It was very damaging to my self-esteem as his child. I felt abandoned, felt unimportant. I felt like I had to be tough, like I couldn't have feelings. Um, and then I was constantly seeking emotional validation from my boyfriends, right? I think that men have the opportunity to, if you see, validate, hear, and hold your daughters and your sons, your children, you're going to teach them how to be emotionally steady on their own. How freaking cool is that?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want that for all the kids because I didn't have that and it sucked.
Yeah. And our relationships as kids, like I told my dad this, my first relationship with a man, like what a man, a role model would be was through my relationship with him. Whether, he knew he was a role model or not, and no different with my mother as well. For me, for my brother, my mother, brother. So I think we don't realize how we're practicing and the cycle over and over when we grow up, do our thing, and then should we have kids, and then we grow them up, and then here we are. And why are we still struggling to break some of these cycles? And I think it does take a little bit of bravery with some vulnerability, and a fucking lot of safety to be able to start to ask ourselves some of these things so that we can big picture contribute better, whether it's in our own household or to society. And I think at the end of the day, like, I know that's my big picture, like, how are we doing these things to better everyone out there? And that's my hope for those that tune in and listen to some of these conversations. So as we are wrapping up, I just have a few more questions for you. So can I just talk a little bit about social media? That's
Yeah,
just because that's
yeah.
always part of our life. So social media, virtual connections on the rise, COVID made it even more so. Do you think that men, I don't know if any are saying this to you when they meet with you, but do you think they're finding it harder to build meaningful, like face-to-face connections? And like, is there a way that this is affecting intimate relationships, or maybe it's better that way?
Mhm.
Are you seeing something different? But another one after that, are you seeing anything different with younger generations? Like, are you seeing men that are coming in their 20s or 30s, not just 40s, 50s and up, that are experiencing these sorts of intimacy, struggles that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, this is a multifaceted issue, but I'll try to focus. Social media, I think, has opened a lot of doors. Like, we can connect with so many different people
Yeah.
around the world,
Yeah.
which is cool, right? Super cool, lots of exposure, lots of ideas and cultures. So I think that's the bright side. I think the shadow side of social media is we can get stuck. I'll say for men and boys, I think you can get stuck in the anonymity of it,
Mm.
right? There's a wall,
Mm-hmm.
like literal wall and screen, um, where maybe we don't have to practice certain social skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like with dating, for example, online dating, um, we can say whatever the fuck we want,
Yeah.
and most likely there's not going to be any consequences.
Right.
So I think those are some of the shadow sides
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. Right. A lot of people will say after kids, emotional intimacy, physical intimacy really shifted for couples. Lots of reasons why. Economical reasons, all sorts of things. We got to work different jobs. Kids are my life, everything and anything in between. You must see, I would imagine, clients that have had sort of life things happen in their relationship, maybe a loss and whatnot, that's created a bit of a ripple effect and a gap. Any insight or anything you'd want to add to that, or anything that stands out for you in the work that you've been doing with men that maybe you're coming with some of these day-to-day sort of things a lot of people experience, but don't think to talk about? How could the loss of something impact me emotionally in my intimacy life? How could, the loss of a job, the promotion, all these sorts of things, how do they impact my partner and my relationship? So just curious if you have any tidbits or anything that you'd want us to think about or add.
Well, first of all, like, these things are normal, right? Typical. Everyone's life has ups and downs. We experience losses, job loss, libido goes up and down for all of these
Yes.
reasons. That's totally normal and typical. I think what I would say though is that over long-term relationships, folks often say like, "Oh, we just fizzle out over time, and that's just how it is."
Yes.
Like emotionally connecting and sexually connecting. I would say it is common, but it's not normal. Meaning,
Interesting.
meaning it doesn't have to be that way if you don't want it to be that way.
It's
So
normal if you make it normal, essentially, is what you're saying.
totally, if you normalize it and you're like, this is just what it is now. Okay, but it doesn't have to be that way if you don't want it to be.
Ah.
So when stuff happens in life, like, it's totally understandable if it's hard to make time for each other, if emotions are up and down, if hormones change, all of
Yeah.
that is normal.
Yeah.
If you want to keep the spark alive, you have to make it a priority. You have to. The energy has to be there. You have to carve out the time,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's 15 minutes a day, just connecting with each other.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got together because we were dating and we found each other sexy, or something about each other turn me on about you, and vice versa. And so how do we maintain that kind of mentality, that dating mentality, throughout the relationship? And that doesn't mean we have to, like, don't you don't have to buy me flowers, and we don't have to go on dates and spend all this money, but it's
No.
carving out the time. Time is very sexy and very meaningful and valuable, and when we give it to someone, that's a huge gift. And when we give our partners, which I feel we often give them the least, if we're together in a household with kids and life and work and traveling and whatever it is we do, we can tend to give to each other the least amount. We usually work and kids get the most. And so, like, how do we sometimes have to shift that and look at, I got with you for a reason. We got married. We suffered and did the wedding and paid all that money. What is it that we're doing now? That's, like, how do we get to this place, and how do we shift out of it? Or if it's not working and this isn't where we want to be, we let it fizzle and we're okay with that, then let's figure that out too. It's like we don't have to let it get stale.
Absolutely. It's like a
Yeah.
cake. It's like
Yeah.
the pretty, beautiful decoration on the outside could be the sex.
Mm.
What is on the inside? There's a lot on the inside.
I'll take both. I'll take the icing and I'll take the sponge. I'll take the pudding in the middle
Yeah,
too. I'll take it all.
on it all.
Give it all the layers, all the flavors.
Yeah.
I want it all.
Mhm.
You know what, Blue? There's lots of things I want to thank you for today. I think you gave me so much time. You gave us time. We had a lot of conversation. And so maybe we can start to wrap up. So first of
Sure.
all, is there anything that you wish, like I did ask you today, or that you want to share that maybe we didn't get to, or you want to go back and clarify?
I think I just, for the men who are listening, I just want to reiterate that this conversation is not about like blaming men, bashing men, hating on men, right? That is very far from the truth. It is about recognizing that the systems the boys and men are raised in nowadays are like hurtful to men, and their emotional awareness and emotional health, mental health, And I think that that is the injustice. And I'm just trying to bring awareness to that because I think that you deserve it. I think you deserve to be heard, validated, seen, loved, and accepted, just like any human. And I think that the female partners sometimes struggle with that too. Like your man also deserves that, right?
Right.
We all deserve that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard when your partner has a tough exterior and they say like there's more beyond that whole iceberg, right? That's just the tip of it.
Mhm.
All behavior is communication. And so when we can chip away and try to safely get to what's beneath it, we realize there's a lot of unfinished business, often from our childhood, that
Mhm.
that brings us to where we are. And so it takes a caring partner to help us sometimes look into those things, And so I think your message, hopefully, I'm hoping your message is well received by partners, by men. Is there anything, like to wrap up, any final piece of advice or something that you want to leave men with that are struggling with emotional intimacy?
Yeah, I would say start with getting curious about your own inner world, like your own feelings. Start to name them. And what I mean is, I am feeling sad because my dad yelled at me today, or I'm feeling really excited because I got a promotion. Like, name the feeling. That is the first place you can start to build your own emotional awareness, and that's where you start to be able to connect with other people.
I love that. It's like name that tune, but name that feeling.
Yeah.
Right? Like we should do that. We should play like little instead of a tune, we should play like a little script where someone's like, upset because something happened and then you have to name what's the feeling,
Yep,
right?
there you
We should play
go.
that game. Well, you and I should do that. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us today. These episodes are like in the early hundreds, so I cannot believe that we had you back at episode 11 and you're back again
Um,
today. And hopefully we'll get more time with you. Your first episode was so fascinating in when I looked at the stats, and whenever I would go back and look at the stats, I haven't looked at that one for a while, but
yeah,
like up and down, up and down. And that was the feedback. For the longest time, a lot of people didn't even listen to it. It was too much sex talk. And then,
yeah.
yeah, and then it was like 6 months later for I don't know what was going on in the world, but for some reason, so many people were listening to that. And then feedback started coming in, which was interesting. And I think it is what I said in the beginning. It's mixed feedback, right? Like I think even when people say, "Oh, you're bringing that up," I think all press is good press. We're bringing it up because it's on
Totally.
all of our minds.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad thing to bring it up. It's just let's talk about it. So for everyone listening, these conversations are door openers. We just opened one today. If you'd like to join this conversation, add to it, ask questions, you know where to find us over here at MFU Podcast. Blue, drop your plug. Tell us where folks can find you if they want to reach out to you.
So online, I am Intimacy with Blue. Intimacy with Blue on TikTok, on Instagram. That's my website, intimacywithblue.com. And I'm now offering coaching services for individuals and couples. So no matter where you live, if you want to work with me, visit my website and check it out. I'd love to support you in your relationship and intimacy goals.
I love it. Thank you for that. Uh,
Mhm.
do check out her socials. We'll have them in our show notes too. I was telling you earlier, Instagram social is wonderful. Great to even just look at. Pleasing for the eye and lots of really good information in small little bits, which I think people appreciate.
Thank you so much. I've loved coming and chatting with you all.